Hello, this is Pete Goodman and
Michele Adams with Meliora Design.
I'm from Valley Forge Trout Unlimited, and we're here to talk about the Turnpike Widening project from milepost 320 to 326. The Turnpike managed to take a really long time to get this project designed and permitted. We tried to help them with that, but it still took a really long time. Next slide.
It's just taking its time. There it goes.
Okay. So the mission of Valley Forge Trout Unlimited is to preserve, protect, and restore streams like Valley Creek. Valley Creek is a exceptional value stream. It is also a Class A wild brown trout fishery. The whole watershed is exceptional value, and all the fish that live in the stream, all the trout that live in the stream were born there, which makes it pretty special in a fisherman's eye.
I'm doing it too fast.
Yeah. Over the course of the years since our establishment in 1976, Valley Forge Trout Unlimited has helped landowners and developers manage their stormwater. We've advocated for sanitary sewer repairs and upgrade. We've consulted with developers to find good stormwater solutions for their developments and to protect streams where the streams went through developments. We hold an annual cleanup on Valley Creek, and we work closely with Valley Forge National Historical Park to ensure that Valley Creek is as healthy as it can be to flowing through that national treasure. We early on realized that Valley Forge Trout Unlimited could not be as effective by itself as with partners. So there was created the Valley Creek Coalition, which was a compilation of nonprofit organizations that supported various things that the Trout Unlimited was trying to accomplish. So the partners in the Valley Creek Coalition were the Open Land Conservancy, Westchester Fish Game and Wildlife Association, Green Valley's Watershed Association, Delaware River Keeper Network, and the League of Women Voters. We've partnered with Valley Forge National Historical Park for as many years as I've been involved and longer. Three Different Township has been a partner at times. Great Valley Association was a partner early on, and through the process of the Turnpike Widening project. And at the end, when we appealed the NPDES permit, the National Parks Conservation Association also joined us in that appeal. Next slide. So Valley Creek, as I said, is an exceptional value stream. It is a lovely place to go and recreate. It's amazing in our urban backyard that we can escape to so much streamside land. A lot of the land is preserved either in Valley Forge Park, in Chesterbrook, in open space, or in Open Land Conservancy preserves. There's also several parks along both Valley and Little Valley that are township parks, both East Whiteland and Tredyffrin. And as I mentioned, it's Class A brown trout fishery. Those fish were raised themselves in the stream.
They produce, and that's pretty amazing.
Yes, amazing. So the Turnpike, this is a map of the the watershed, the Valley Creek watershed, and you can see that most of the land of the watershed lies in East Whiteland Township, and then further to the east, Tredyffrin Township. Running through the northern part of Tredyffrin Township is Route 76, which is the Pennsylvania Turnpike. That's the highlighted area with the red arrow pointing to it. That is the land, or that is the road that this presentation is about. That is what was going to be widened to 3 lanes in each direction. In 2010, Valley Forge Trout Unlimited wrote a position statement because we were getting some negative press that we were holding up the progress of this development. And so we wrote the position statement to restate our mission to preserve, protect, and restore Valley Creek, and restate that we're not against development, and to describe the 4 basic factors that we were looking for in controlling stormwater, controlling the volume of runoff, the rate of discharge of the runoff, the temperature, and the pollution contained in that runoff. And the last thing in the position statement was to ensure that the Turnpike Commission abided by the existing statutes, codes, and regulations.
So we're going to talk about the long discussion to help the Turnpike get their stormwater better on the expanded Turnpike. And this diagram shows the existing Turnpike, which probably everyone has driven it. It's 12-foot lanes, 2 lanes in each direction with shoulders and a common median, one median. It's about 10 feet. And there's also areas where trucks and cars can pull off. Right now, the existing Turnpike has no stormwater management. There's a variety of inlets that just discharge to outfalls that land on private property. Some discharge onto roads, some go right to streams, but none of the existing Turnpike has any stormwater management right now. It's mostly overland dispersed. The widening will significantly increase the size of the Turnpike. Now we'll have 3 12-foot lanes in each direction, a 12-foot shoulder in each direction, and a 12-foot median in each direction. The total width will be about 122 feet. So it's a very wide Turnpike. And early on, the Turnpike did not want to engage in any discussions to potentially make this less of a widening. And I know it's hard to see on the computer, but this just blows up the diagram. So in the top, you can see the existing Turnpike, and the lower 2 are the proposed Turnpike with or without sound walls. A lot of cut and fill, a lot of earthwork required for this project. This is just a slide explaining the specifics, the berms. So originally the Turnpike was going to meet all the regulations for stormwater management, and they said they would no longer be discharging onto private property or directly into streams and wetlands. But the stormwater that comes uphill of the Turnpike from the north to the south, a lot of water still drains under the Turnpike, and that's going to continue after this project. The project runs across a lot of the headwaters as well, headwater tributaries, as well as the main stem of Valley Creek. It's a long road. It's 122 feet wide for 6.5 miles. That's a lot of impervious. And Pete, you want to take this one?
So the Turnpike said that they were going to meet all the regulations, but they kept moving the bar on that. I guess when you're as big and involve as much of the state and the politicals in the state, that you can kind of manage the regulations a little bit. So originally they were going to treat the Turnpike widening as a redevelopment area, which would mean that they would manage 20% of their impervious as though it were meadow, and that would thus increase their their need for stormwater management. They soon figured out that we didn't have to really do that, that they were considered a linear project and an infrastructure project of the state, and subject to Chapter 102.8 G2II, they were exempt from having to manage the stormwater on the existing impervious, even though it was going to be totally reconstructed and potentially even relocated from its original position. So there was no plan for management of existing or runoff from existing impervious.
It was a very generous interpretation of redevelopment in favor of the turnpike.
The other thing I love about that last slide is that super clean inlet. I don't know if you've ever noticed an inlet along the turnpike, but I've never seen one that clean in my life.
One of the things that came up, a lot of numbers here, but one of the things we really struggled with is there were so many documents and permit application files, and the numbers were never the same. So it was somewhere around 19.8 acres of new impervious associated with the turnpike expansion, but depending on whether you looked on the drawings or worksheets or permit applications, it seemed even the turnpike couldn't get their numbers right, which did not give us much confidence. And within Valley Creek, there would be 4.47 miles of widening, which would be an increase of about 41% on a total of impervious area, and 216 acres total, which is a big project. Yeah.
Yes, significant. A lot of additional impervious, and the way they were calculating that was questionable from a lot of different angles. So our timeline actually starts a little ahead of this timeline. In 2005. I had some initial meetings with the Great Valley Association, who was concerned with the widening, and they had gotten wind of the project coming up because of people in their backyards taking measurements and doing geotesting and that kind of thing. So they had the Great Valley Association as a local community association in Tredyffrin that number of their members had residences along the turnpike, and so they were concerned and set up a turnpike subcommittee, two pieces of that subcommittee, one for sound walls and one for stormwater runoff. I was involved with the stormwater runoff committee. Eventually, it made it to Valley Forge National Park, and Deirdre Gibson, who was chief of planning at the time, called a meeting with all the stakeholders she was concerned about the turnpike and additional runoff and the impacts as it would go through the roughly 2 miles that abutted Valley Forge National Park. In January of 2009, the Turnpike presented at an open house their plans display for their initial plan for the widening from 320 to 326. And as we say in the slide here, it did not go so well. They got a lot of pushback. Most every resident was upset with what they were seeing. The elected officials were cornered by residents and said, "You've got to change this." It was a ill-conceived plan with something in the neighborhood of 96 takings, either whole or partial. A lot of cut and fill, as Michele had mentioned, a lot of grade backs. So yeah, it was a pretty awful plan.
And this was 3 years after things started with Deirdre first meeting, and 11 years back, over 11 years ago from now.
Right.
Long time.
So the Turnpike, in their wisdom, picked up their ball and went home. They were at the time also having problems with where money was being spent at the commission, and executive director was under investigation, and they just couldn't add another level of insult to their projects. So they essentially picked up their ball and went home. They suspended the project in March of 2009. And also, interestingly enough, suspended the slip ramp project, which they had just gotten permitted. So that really upset a whole lot of people, including the political entities that support our area and the area development. So there was much to do about that suspension, and it took about 6 months to get it reinstated. And I believe they reinstated the slip ramp project initially, and then went back to the widening project. The first NPDES submission was June of 2012. That's a few years ago too.
8 years ago, and that was their first stormwater submission to DEP.
Right.
Formal submission application.
The commission decided that they needed to have roundtable meetings, and what these were was stakeholder meetings to help them, or at least this is what what was explained to us that attended the meetings, that these were to help them design the Turnpike project and make it more efficient and more agreeable to the stakeholders. Well, those stakeholder meetings, those roundtable meetings, went on interminably. By February of 2015, there had been 16 roundtable meetings, and there was more to come. Stormwater rules and interpretations changed over time, and I kind of alluded to that earlier, that they found ways to evade some of the state regulations. Early on at the roundtable, they took things off the table for discussion, such as spray irrigation as a management tool for managing their stormwater runoff. They also would not agree to monitoring performance of their BMPs, and they refused to reduce the median width. On the table, they left lane widths. Not sure what that was even about at this point. Mitigation areas, they kept incessantly asking if we could give them mitigation areas, because even though they said in their charts they were meeting all their runoff obligations, they were still looking for mitigation areas, which didn't yield us very much confidence. And they did add retaining walls rather than grading back into many of the properties that abutted the Turnpike. So in July of 2015, there was a DEP public hearing, which we pushed long and hard for. But it was pretty much an us and them kind of hearing. It was pretty obvious that DEP was pretty aligned with the Turnpike at that point, and through the meeting, and then the Valley Creek Coalition members were on the opposite side. So
It's always interesting how DEP ends up advocating on the side of the applicant so often rather than the side of the environmental interest.
Yeah. No, it's the Department of Environmental Permitting sometimes more than protection. Anyway, the public hearing was held, and later in that year, at the very end of the year, Tredyffrin approved a settlement with the Turnpike Commission, which essentially agreed to Tredyffrin not enforcing some of their stormwater regulations, the ones that the Turnpike was having difficulty meeting. Their regulations, especially around rate, were a little bit more stringent than the state regulations that DEP was holding them to. In February, we appealed that settlement agreement to Commonwealth Court. We had
lawyer said,
yeah, we had run the agreement by John Wilmer, our attorney, and he had said they can't do that, can't just arbitrarily apply ordinances to some folks and agree to not enforce them with other folks. So we felt it was illegal. Our board felt that it was illegal, and we actually, entering into a court case, we have to get National Trout Unlimited's approval to do that, and we were able to convince National Trout Unlimited that it was a illegal act and that we should be appealing this in court.
Nonetheless,
in July of 2016, DEP, in their wisdom, issued the NPDES permit. And we were still convinced that did not adequately, the BMPs that the Turnpike was proposing were not adequately protecting Valley Creek. And we subsequently appealed that. I believe it was September. I think that's the next date, Michelle. Okay. So we appealed in September of 2016, along with the National Parks Conservation Association, the NPDES permit, which put us and the National Parks Association against the DEP and the Turnpike Commission.
And it's probably important to point out that when DEP issues a permit, they don't have the staff or the resources to do a technical review for an application for stormwater. And this is true across all stormwater permits with DEP. They do not do a technical review. They rely on the signature of the design engineer, and in this case, the Turnpike's consultant, to certify that everything's designed right and it's correct. And so DEP takes the applicant at their word. Want me to take this one?
Yes,
yeah.
Please.
So Trout Unlimited appealed. As Pete had mentioned, prior to the Turnpike expansion, the Turnpike had also improved the slip ramps, which are built at the Route 29 exit of the Turnpike. These were built, and when those were designed, we did a review, and there were lots of problems, but because it would be difficult to prove the water quality in the Atwater Lake was being impacted, Trout Unlimited did not appeal this permit.
That's correct.
The project got built. When we went to the Chester County Conservation District to review the drawings for the Turnpike expansion, the Conservation District very helpfully pulled out a box of files for the slip ramps and said, you guys might want to know about this. And it turned out that none of the stormwater systems that had been built for the slip ramps were working. They were in dismal states of varying degrees of failure. And you can see on some of these pictures, there was erosion on the slopes that was unrepaired. Infiltration basins were definitely not infiltrating. They had run into some springs that were discharging fresh water. There was sediment. And so the conservation district was doing their best to get the turnpike to fix some of these things. But in that process, a lot of the original promises for water quality and volume management were being abandoned at the slip ramps. So this sort of gave us evidence that we could not trust the turnpike and their designers to develop a stormwater system that was going to actually do what they were promising. So back to the NPDES application for the expansion.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems with that. There was the land use types were inappropriate. Land use types were used for the runoff coefficients.
Oh, come on, Pete, shopping center's a forest, right? Anyways.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had one section that was listed as forest in good condition, which was actually a mowed edge of the turnpike, and it was kind of crazy. Lots of math errors, as we had pointed out earlier. It depended on where you looked in the charts and in the information that the STV had provided, what kind of numbers you came up with. They couldn't even keep the total numbers of the impervious consistent across the various documents they needed to submit to DEP. And we certainly had no confidence in their BMPs with the failures at the slip ramps.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
In 2017, we're pushing along now. We've been in the loss or the appeal of the NPDES permit for longer than a year. We've gone through discovery. We're talking about what it might look like when we win this, and what it might look like. Might it be better if we pursue a settlement agreement? And Frank Donahoe, my compatriot in crime at Trout Unlimited, who attended a lot of our meetings, a lot of the roundtable meetings, he came up with the idea that it might be a good time to maybe change tactics. And we talked about this with Michele and John Wilmer and said, might we be able to not battle the footprint, but to improve the BMPs within the footprint, not do an entire redesign, but to redesign the BMPs so that they actually function, and that we needed to remember our ultimate goal here was to end up with a project that's going to protect Valley Creek from the runoff of the entire turnpike and infiltrate that stormwater that the project would create and then capture and discharge it to groundwater either through infiltration or slow release.
Yeah, I think the question was, if we won at the Environmental Hearing Board, if we were successful, what was it that we wanted? And all we really wanted was stormwater that worked. It didn't seem like a big...
Yeah, and I think the question with the win at the Environmental Hearing Board, I believe I remember John saying that if we won, we would probably be sent back to the table to redesign the plan with the Turnpike Commission, which we've been doing for so many years already. So that didn't seem like maybe the
Not like
the best
win.
place we wanted to go. So anyway, we contacted the Turnpike Commission, the project manager, Kevin Shurek, and proposed this to him, proposed a meeting, and that meeting was held in November of 2017. And to discuss the things that I just had mentioned.
You threw all the lawyers out.
Yes.
On both sides.
That was actually maybe the part that sealed the deal for the Turnpike, was the fact that there wouldn't be any lawyers at the technical meetings where we would discuss how to improve the BMPs that were designed. So we had 4 technical meetings. I think we had a meeting in November. I know we had one in December and January. But we had at least 4 leading up to the Valentine's Day meeting in 2018, where the attorneys joined us, and we had a big room at the Turnpike building over in Plymouth Meeting, and there was a cast of seemed like 1,000, but I think it was probably only it was probably less than 30, but more than 20. Lots of lawyers, a few engineers, other staff, and it was a long meeting, but the outcome of the meeting was that the attorneys agreed to work on a settlement agreement. That settlement agreement, the last entrance I find in my notes, had 12 iterations. It went on for months, just the settlement agreement. And we had not yet finished our technical meetings. There were still a few things to work out. I think we still had a soil specification to hammer out, though we were well on the way with that. So here's a list of who was there for the technical meetings. And for every meeting, there was a member of the Turnpike Commission. That was Kevin Shurek. He attended every meeting with Scott Brown from NTM, who was their stormwater consultant. I believe Frank and I attended all the meetings, as well as Michele, and Clay Emerson was hired from Princeton Hydro by the National Parks Conservation Association. Some of the meetings were attended by DEP, Anna Damarou and Christopher Smith, Steve Burgo and his consultant, Dan
from E.B. Walsh.
Dan Walsh, right.
From E.B. Walsh.
E.B.
Yeah.
Walsh. Dan.
Forget Dan's last name. No, it wasn't.
No, different Dan.
Different Dan.
Okay. Anyway, and Amanda John from National Parks Conservation Association, I believe, was there for at least one meeting. So,
Could I just add that
Yes.
when we had these technical meetings, Kevin Shurek from the Turnpike, the engineer from the Turnpike, not the consultants, came to them fully engaged and looking to find solutions that when you had the technical people in the room, it was productive, and
yeah,
everyone was
these
engaged.
meetings were
Yeah.
extremely productive. And if I might add, that having Meliora and Princeton Hydro in the same room in the persons of Michele and Clay was really dynamic. We were very lucky to have the smartest people in the room.
Okay, thanks. It's embarrassing. Yeah. So when we got into the technical discussion, the devil's in the details. And as I'd mentioned, there were multiple errors and mistakes, as my old professor used to call them, just math blunders in the Turnpike documents, as well as incorrect engineering assumptions. And key ones were things like details for the BMPs, whether or not things could be built, constructability. Some of the stormwater was very, shall we say, creative, and it was questionable whether it could physically be built. There's still a little bit of that in question. And a key thing was the soils. So STV had made a lot of assumptions that the soils would control the rate of flow instead of having a structural thing like a stormwater box or an outlet control the flow. But these were literally just the soils they were scraping off the side of the turnpike. They weren't engineered. Even as we went through this and corrections were made, we still had to keep checking and making sure that things were correct.
Go back.
Go back.
Yeah, you got it. You mentioned the shower detail. You always skip the shower detail.
Well, after all the discussion about, one thing that we asked for is that where the turnpike couldn't infiltrate or thought infiltration might eventually fail, we wanted them to slow release the water for the small frequent storms at a flow rate that was more representative of a groundwater discharge, really slow release of the stormwater after it had been treated. And we had a lot of discussion about that, but still when the final drawings came back, the detail that was documented was essentially like a shower head that would let all the water out just as in a big spray. And so
they continued the perforated pipe from the filter side of the box into the discharge outfall, and would have been a shower head.
Let all the water out on that detail. A lot of discussion about the soils. We argued pretty strongly that if they were going to use bioretention, that it was an engineered system, and the soils were engineered no different than asphalt or concrete is engineered. And so you need strong specifications and testing and construction, and you can't just use whatever you got. We talked about the state of Maryland soil specifications, and so a lot of the failure we saw at the slip ramp was due to soil problems. So a lot of discussion and finally specifications that the soils are essentially an engineered material with very few fines. It's a combination of sand and compost, essentially. This diagram, which you cannot read, shows some of the details, but if you look at the top diagram, what you're seeing is what's proposed as a bioretention area, which is lined and impervious on top of a series of stormwater arches. So this is a contrived system where the bioretention treats the water and then slow releases it, but in the big storms overflows to a series of detention arches below the bioretention system. There are some pretty steep slopes on the side. We're still not convinced entirely that they can build this or that it will work entirely. So if and when this gets built, getting through that construction period and making sure these work is going to be critically important.
The red lines on this detail are all things that were added through our discussions to the original detail. It's
a lot of changes.
Yes.
In addition to the bioretention area, there's several areas where the Turnpike's only stormwater management was the sediment vortex boxes, the concrete vortex boxes, and then the water would go to large underground vaults. I think you pointed out this one's like 252 feet long, right. Huge underground vaults to be released. And so for these vaults, we pushed that, again, the water would, in the small frequent storms, would discharge like more like a little garden hose dribble, that it would be more of a mimic of groundwater than a detention basin type of release, and that was really important, and that the temperature was also very important. Lessons learned.
So yeah, we learned a lot of lessons over time. You can't expect to get anything done quickly when dealing with a governmental or quasi-governmental agency. Obviously, the Turnpike was that agency, and getting anything out of them was took a long time to do. They, on the other hand, pushed us aggressively on schedules every time they wanted something from us. So it was kind of a one-way street, but it takes a long time to get anything changed through the Turnpike or through their engineers. Sometimes longer through their engineers. You can't be assured of the rules, codes, and laws You can't be assured that they will be fully enforced when dealing with an entity such as the Turnpike. Obviously, we had the settlement agreement that the Turnpike entered into with Tradifrin. We saw the way that they were able to get around some of the state regulations. So it's be sure of what you're trying to accomplish and never lose sight of that ultimate goal, because sometimes the rules change as you're playing the game. You must make sure what they design will work and can be built. We found that obviously with the slip ramps not working, and then in analyzing their drawings in the technical meetings, which we hadn't really talked about or considered previously, that they were constructible. They didn't have detail enough on the drawings to be able to build some of the things that they had designed.
Never assume that because DEP issues a permit go back again. Never assume that because DEP issues a permit that the regulations have been met. Never make that assumption.
Right. Yeah. And lastly, you must have the best and most dedicated team to be in the battle for the long haul, because it's going to be a long haul, especially a project of this size, and the bigger the entity, the longer it's going to take.
14 years and they still haven't started construction. Right. And that.
So here's the current status. Actually, I copied this right off the Turnpike's website back when we were still going to do this presentation in March. That information has subsequently been updated, and that's the last bullet on the slide. It now reads, funding will need to be closely evaluated once the Commission is able to assess the full impacts of COVID-19 in the coming months and determine what funding is available for this project. Originally, at the project presentation, the open house, the project was estimated to cost $150 million. You can see in the third bullet here, they're estimating it to be $325 million today and take approximately 6 years. We believe that they've decided to split it into 2 phases, but now with COVID, we're not sure about that potential for not doing it at all. Not sure what that really means in Turnpike speak. That's it from us today. I'm Pete Goodman.
Michele Adams from Meliora, and if anybody has questions or wants info, please feel free to contact us.
Our information is in the Watershed Congress information.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.